Hello, everybody. Surprise! And welcome to an emergency pod. The Eagles making a surprise trade. Bo Wulf, Anthony Gargano in studio. Jahan Dotson, the 16th overall pick in 2022, is an Eagle. Howie Roseman watched the same practices we did because we were talking about this all summer. The Eagles desperately needed somebody else on offense. Here comes Jahan Dotson and a 5th-round pick in exchange for a 3rd-round pick and 2 7ths. What do you make of the deal?
I love it, Bo. I look at it and I go, it's exactly what they needed, right? We talked about it, like you said, all day.
Like every day
they needed somebody to step up. I love Dotson, right?
Okay.
Young player. Look what he's done the last 2 years. And look at the quarterbacks that he's had. We remember last year he smoked the Eagles for 110 yards. I think
that's right.
10 catches. He had a touchdown.
Best game of his career, I believe.
I mean, he was incredible, right? Look at the quarterbacks that Dotson has played with, right? Jahan has played with Sam Howell, right? Taylor Heineke, Davis Mills. Those are the types of quarterbacks that he's played with. I've always thought he popped to me, right? I looked at him and was like, and they had some decent receivers. They had no quarterback play. Kind of got lost a little bit. I love having Jahan Dotson come here. I just think that's a great move by Howie. I love the trade.
There were a couple ways they could have gone here, right? You could have looked for more of a veteran plug-and-play type, like a Robert Woods, a guy on the back end of his career, who you would know what he was coming in. He would fit a role and probably be gone after a year. This way, they're bringing in Dotson, who has got 2 years left on his rookie deal. There's some upside here. I think that's interesting. Type of player-wise, he's a smaller player.
Yep, 5'11",
178, right? So that is interesting, and it's probably going to take a little bit of time for him to grow into the offense, but it's nice that we have this answer now. We is it going to be Johnny Wilson and Britton Covey, rotating? Now you have a guy who at least has some talent and some upside.
Right, and you push Johnny Wilson, who I still like for his size, down the rest of the truck, right? And there's not as much pressure. The thing I love about Dotson, too, is, look, we talk about the Eagles' depth on offense, right? And what was behind AJ and Devontae. If something happens to either of those two, the one thing about Dotson is that he's a down-the-field threat. He actually is a guy that can get down the field for you. I love having him with space, with those two on the field. Like, when you're going trips, when you're like that, I love that.
Well,
the space that he'll have on the field is big.
The thing that you're saying about the quarterbacks, it's a little bit, to a much smaller degree, a little bit like the Saquon conversation.
Yes.
Right? It's a lot to pay for a running back, but you get Saquon in an offense where he's not the focal point of opposing defenses anymore, behind a good offensive line. Just think of what he can do. Jahan Dotson, it has been a relatively underwhelming start to his career, but you get him in an offense where everybody's focused on A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts' legs. He gets one-on-one matchups. All of a sudden, this is a guy who can grow.
Yeah, and I look at it I go, all right, let's look at why he's been underwhelming, right? Bad franchise, right? Going through awful offense coordinators, talking about the quarterbacks. This is it now. He still put up, decent numbers. I mean, he popped on the field. Like, when you're watching them, he popped. Like, to me, I kept wondering, how come he's not a bigger part of that offense? But they were a mess, Washington. And I love your comp with Barkley because, again, you got two guys that were coming that are obviously Barkley with offensive line issues, quarterback issues, the whole thing. And now you're on this team with Hurts and all those other weapons to kind of fill in.
Yeah, I mean, he's 24 years old. His rookie year was a little bit better. In 12 games, 35 catches for 523 yards. Last year, 17 games, 49 catches for 519 yards. So less of a big play threat last year in an offense that was struggling.
Right. And remember, you had Scary Terry, you had Samuel, and you also didn't have a quarterback that can go down the field. I mean, that was I thought that stunted him and stunted his growth as a weapon. So I think Sam Howell wasn't going to push the ball down the field. And how many they had no running game. How many 3rd and longs did you see them have? I mean, and check downs. And I love this move. And I like it so much better than, say, Robert Woods. How many times have we seen them, any team,
get
go
the Julio
after
Jones kind of guy?
Like the aging veteran that's got one foot in the grave. I know Thielen, people wanted Thielen. And same thing, man. He's on a downward slide. You got a guy, and this is, I would think, why I love how his roster management is, because he's not looking just for now. He's looking out for the next couple of years. And I love now, I don't have to worry about that third receiver next year.
Yeah, and we will talk to Zach Berman in a second just to get a sense of, you always want to figure out why it is that the other team is trading him. What is it that Washington didn't see from Jahan Dotson that they were willing to get rid of him? But just on Howie quickly, I do think from an Eagles fan perspective, from a content machine perspective, it is nice knowing you have Howie Roseman, who is always interested in doing something, right? And we talked about it all offseason. It was the biggest surprise to me of the offseason that the Eagles didn't add somebody else at wide receiver, but Howie's playing the long game. He's patient. He makes that trade on draft day that gets them an extra third-round pick. Talking to people in the building, that was kind of like potentially earmarked as we can use that for a wide receiver. And now, this is their version of the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade from 2 summers ago. They have addressed the biggest hole in the roster.
Exactly. And you look at it. Now, when I look at offense, the only thing, I think the next thing that they'll add, and I'll throw this back at you, is a backup tight end.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. I think Grant Kekater has looked solid, and then, it could be E.J. Jenkins as a 3, but I agree with you. But that's one where probably you can find post cuts, right? Like a cast off.
Without a doubt. This piece, I thought, was paramount.
Totally agree.
Right? Like they were so top heavy at that position that you add a kid that got sticky hands.
It changes the ceiling of the offense.
It does. It really does. And again, in space, like think about it when you're in the field and you have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Goddard, Barkley, and now you have Dotson, right? Like that's a lot of space now that you'll be able to work, a lot of one-on-one.
All right, let's bring in the man himself, our insider, Zach Berman. Zach, what do you make of the deal? What were you doing when you found out?
I was packing for a trip and then jumped to do work on this. Look, I like Dotson. I liked him coming out of Penn State. I thought as a rookie he was promising. You saw the big playability then. I think this is an expensive price. That 3rd-round pick is expensive. And I do know, I heard what you said, Bo, about how that extra pick gave them the flexibility to make this type of move. I also know they really like next year's draft, and so they weren't just going to trade it for the sake of trading it. So Dotson's age profile, 24, a player who, if you remember in 2022, the Eagles extensively scouted that wide receiver class. They traded for A.J. Brown, but they had 2 first-round picks, or 3 first-round picks rather, right? They were looking hard at wide receivers that offseason. They know Dotson. They know the Penn State program. He's from the Lehigh Valley. You're probably not thinking about this as like a player you're picking up the 5th-year option on, but you're thinking you got 2 years under contract for an ascending player. I heard what Anthony said. It's absolutely right in terms of he's going from a situation where he didn't have good quarterback play, where they were trying to figure out their offense. He had 2 different coordinators the past 2 years, Scott Turner, then Eric Bieniemy. Now he goes to a place where he's the 3rd receiver, maybe even the 5th option in the passing game. He'll presumably, I don't want to say be an afterthought for opposing defensive coordinators, but certainly not at the front of a game plan. And given the fact that he has that ability both in the NFL and at Penn State to get behind the defense, I think this is a good pickup from a football perspective for the Eagles.
So value-wise, Zach, because they're getting the 5th-round pick back, it's something like a late 3rd, early 4th-round value. I'm with you that you're paying for a guy who hasn't been super productive, just like the yards per route run stuff over the past 2 years. He's 90th of 109 guys. But I think the upside is you're selling yourself on this is a guy who's getting into a new offense. But the word from like Washington camp this summer was that the coaches there were obviously underwhelmed with him, right?
Yes. I've been following this story closely out of Washington. And there was a school of thought that, they were trying to light a fire under former 1st-round pick, right? There was a quote from Dan Quinn last week where he said the number 2 wide receiver job is up for grabs. And he mentioned like De'Ami Brown. He mentioned Olamide Zaccheaus. And in Washington, they're looking at this and saying Jahan Dotson was the 16th pick in the draft 2 years ago. He was their starter the past 2 years. Why isn't he the number 2 guy? So it was kind of viewed almost like they're trying to motivate him, but it was also perceived that staff was down on him. I tend to like the idea of trading for a guy who It's not the GM who drafted him. It's not the coaching staff who drafted him, because they don't have that type of devotion or equity to him. Now you can say that staff has clear eyes, but also that staff tends to like to start over and have their own people in there. Dotson might not be for everyone from like a side, he was what, 5'11", 178 coming out. But from a play perspective and the upside perspective, it certainly makes sense. I mean, and you also have to look at it compared to who's on the Eagles roster. He's an upgrade over Paris Campbell, an upgrade over Britton Covey, an upgrade over Johnny Wilson, an upgrade over John Ross. So if you're saying, all right, how can you field the best roster in 2025? I'm sorry, 2024, and perhaps even 2025. I think Dotson makes a lot of sense.
And we remember last year you covered that game where he blitzed the Eagles in that 38-31 game where he had 110 yards or whatever it was, 10 catches. Yep. He's a guy that I think gives you some speed that you didn't have. I also like it better. Like we were talking about it, Zach, and Bo brought up Robert Woods. And you get guys at the end of their careers, and you know how that works. They lack explosiveness. And both he and Phelan were the guys that were out there. I think with Dotson, you got a guy that's legitimately explosive. And then God forbid, like, you know that, AJ or Devontae especially might miss a game or two. And you got a guy that is explosive. And I think that's a need for them.
You hit it on the head. I think some of the trades from both a value and production perspective that haven't worked out for Howie is when he's trading for the guy at the end of the career or later on, trading for Golden Tate, trading for Robert Quinn. I think if this is more, now it's not the same value, but if this is more in line with a CJ Gardner-Johnson type move, although that was contract related, but you get a guy in their third year, in their fourth year, it's a better age profile. Now the Eagles missed on Dorial Green-Beckham, a similar type of change of scenery type trade. But I think overall I would rather trade for a 24-year-old wide receiver than a 31-year-old wide receiver.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting timing-wise. I appreciate that they're getting it done now so you can get these guys a chance to coalesce and do it in the season. I know you're smiling because you think I'm going to say it's about the Ospreys. We'll get to the Ospreys. We'll get there. And I think that that's nice. In terms of the fit, I'm sure that it's obvious that Howie watched what we watched over the course of the summer. I'm sure he canvassed the market. Who is the best guy that I can bring in for a reasonable price? I think the fit football-wise is not perfect just because – like the superpower of Devontae Smith in the slot is something that can really supercharge the offense. I'm not so sure that you want to put Devontae in the slot and Dotson outside. But I think to your point of like if they miss guys, if A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith misses time, Dotson certainly gives you a little bit more upside. And then, Zach, the timing of having signed A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith to these long-term contracts, maybe quelling the idea of, well, now you've got a new young guy in here who's taking away targets. That's not a concern for those guys.
You're right. It's not a replacement, right? If Devontae was going into a contract year or a year where he hadn't signed his deal and he's on the fifth-year option, then you start to look around about target share, things of that nature. I think it's pretty clear what the pecking order is here. Now, Dotson is someone who, at least coming out of Penn State, was thought to be able to play around the formation. You are smaller with him and Devontae, but I think he makes a lot of sense from a playing style perspective because he can go deep, because he has some run after the catch ability. I mean, I keep going back. He was a big play player at Penn State, and that's when the Eagles talk about explosive plays, I don't know if you were getting that from Paris Campbell, from Britton Covey, from Johnny Wilson, and you're getting that from Jahan Dotson.
No, you aren't. And that's why I love it because, Zach, and look, again, the quarterback play, I can't stress enough that was in Washington. Forget about that they were a dead franchise and they were arcing toward what happened, which was the blow-up. But, Sam Howell's not pushing the ball down the field, right? Davis Mills and Taylor Heineke aren't getting the ball out and up. And that's what Dotson, that's why he's here. That's why – how much one-on-one is he going to see? He's going to see some man. And I think that's a matchup that you'll be able to exploit.
And the ball that Jalen throws best is the deep ball, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
So Nick, now I know this isn't Nick's offense per se anymore, but Nick really liked the idea of Quez Watkins in the slot because of the way he he could stretch the field for AJ and Devontae, and then, if he's getting 3-4 targets a game, if he catches one or two of them, it's a 50 play. It's 40 play, 50. I'm sorry, 40 yards, 50 yards. So that's the factor here too. He's a major upgrade as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, it's a great point that you bring up with Quez, because how many times, guys, did you see Quez behind the defense? I mean, it was like he just was not a gifted receiver, right? Like Dotson will be able to bring that ball in.
I think that's right. That's certainly the theory behind it, right? He's certainly got the speed that you need to take the top off the defense, change the shape, right? Okay. All right. Well, very quickly, let me say that this emergency podcast, Zach, is brought to us by Indeed. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/AllCity. That's Indeed.com/AllCity. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Thanks to Indeed for making this emergency pod happen. Zach, last question for you from me, because it's roster time. How do you think this changes the roster math at wide receiver for the Eagles?
Yeah, Paris Campbell. I think he's not going to be on the 53 right now. He's the guy who I would bump. I don't think it certainly doesn't affect Johnny Wilson, right? It does. I still think Britton Covey's going to be on the team, given his special teams ability, given that he can help you as a smaller guy in the slot there, route running and whatnot. But I think this takes Paris Campbell's spot on the 53 if I'm putting my list together now.
And don't you like how they're with Johnny Wilson as the push down to the 4 with his size? I like the kind of how it all kind of fits, how they all complement each other.
You're right, and I think you have more of a pecking order, and it's the point that you made before I came on, Anthony, which is, and Bo and I have talked about this for 6 months now. AJ and Devontae have been remarkably healthy. AJ's missed only the playoff game since he came to Philly. Devontae's missed only that Giants game since he came to Philly. But what happens if Devontae's down 3 weeks? What happens if AJ's down 6 weeks, right? Now, Jahan Dotson is not Devontae Smith, and he's not AJ Brown, but he's better than what you had there. And I think he's a competent. He's been a starting receiver in the league. Not 60 catch Nelson Aguilar production, but he has decent production. He caught 7 touchdowns last year. He was a big play threat as a rookie. I think that you feel more comfortable that your offense can at least sustain itself should AJ or Devontae go down for a bit.
Yet we can sort of chuckle at the idea that the big moves of the Eagles offseason, similar value for Jahan Dotson and Hassan Reddick.
Yeah, it's interesting when you put it like that. Now, the Hassan
a
Reddick
little bit
deal
different, but yeah,
is 2026. But yeah, and look, I think the only hang up here, like I said at the beginning, is that 3rd round pick is valuable. It's a really deep draft next year. You don't like moving off of that, but this is a team with Super Bowl aspirations, and this isn't just a rental. This is at least a 2-year player.
And just because we haven't said it, they had 2 3rd-round picks, so they still have a 3rd-round pick in next year's draft. They traded the
exactly. And you got the 5th back.
Yes. All right. Well, that'll do it for the emergency pod. The Eagles making a splash on the day of the Ospreys. If you are watching live, 2:00, the 7th annual Osprey Awards. Very excited about that. A big excitement, a big announcement coming up. But the big announcement of the day, Jahan Dotson is an Eagle. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We will talk to you later. And as always, we love you.